the new Fuji GFX. Let's just get into it.
Welcome to the inner workings of my mind. Nights like this, I become afraid.
All right, yes, this is a hospital gurney. And yes, this is the Fuji GFX. Now, for those of you who are looking for more, I guess, of a technical review, that kind of thing, looking into different things like pixel densities and whatnot, this is not going to be that review. I'm still working with the pre-production unit, so not everything on this is finalized, but I've been getting a lot of emails from people saying, you know, what do you think of this camera? So I just wanted to do a really quick video detailing a few of the things that I like, some of the things that I think might need to be improved, but probably will be improved via firmware, and more or less just give you a basic rundown of what it's like to work with this thing. So, to kind of kick things off, the first thing I did with this was I took it outside in minus 37 degree weather. And that's in Celsius. Now, for a guy like me who typically shoots portrait work, that's not the type of weather that I would ever operate in. But we hit this big cold snap here in Calgary, so I thought, what the hell, let's see what it does. I took it out there for about 2.5 hours, and this thing it never quit. The batteries, I think, maybe lost 1 bar. The camera itself handled like a champ. It didn't slow down at all. The screen on the back, when the preview of the image would come up, it would start to kind of get a little bit laggy, but I mean, after 2.5 hours out in that type of weather, this thing actually performed incredibly well. Now, being primarily a portrait photographer, I'm going to touch on what it was like to use this camera in that scenario. Obviously, you know, I went out and shot some landscapes, but that was just something I was just doing for fun. It's not something I really do on, you know, a regular occasion. So, obviously, the big thing with a lot of these camera systems when they come out, one of the big things that people start to wonder about is the focusing system. Now again, this is pre-production. It doesn't have the final firmware in it. And if you've ever shot with Fuji, you know that where a camera starts and where it ends up via firmware updates can be a completely different camera. Now with this being pre-production, I was actually impressed with it. When I was outside and shooting in the nice bright light, you know, it found everything, it locked in quickly. It was awesome. In the studio, it did tend to hunt every once in a while. It wasn't a lot, but when it did hunt, it would hunt for, you know, longer than I would like it to. Often, a couple of times I had the model, you know, in a pose and she would have to hold it for, you know, like 5 or 6 seconds while my camera tried to find her. Now that being said, I also tend to use the smallest focus point on these cameras. This system has 425 focus points. Now, that gives me the ability to put a focus point directly onto a model's eye. And the reason I do that is because I really, you know, for me, portrait photography, everything, a lot of it has to do with the eyes. So if the eyes aren't in focus, to me, the image just kind of loses all of its luster. So using that tiny, tiny focus point is essentially what I think was making the camera hunt in the lower light. Had I made the focus point larger, it would have found it more easily. But the thing with medium format is that your depth of field is so shallow when you're shooting at, say, f4, that kind of thing. And I wanted to shoot these lenses wide open just to kind of see how they operated in that regard. So now shooting at f4, you know, if I nailed it right on the eye would be tack sharp, but then even like the eyebrow, anything like that would start to fall out of focus. So I needed it to nail it every time, and using that larger focus point gave me more opportunity to miss. Now, with that being said, the focus accuracy on this thing, when it does hit, is amazing. I did everything from put my subjects all the way to the very corner, the very outside of the frame, and used the focus point on the very outside of the frame, and it was still tack sharp, which is incredibly, you know, amazing. My Nikon system, it doesn't do that. It's, you know, I use the center focus point pretty much exclusively on my Nikon system, being that, you know, if I use any of the outer rim focus points, my chance of hitting focus probably drops by about 20%, and if I use the very outer focus points, my chance of hitting focus probably drops by about 90%. So I was actually super impressed that this camera performed as well as it did for autofocus, especially being in a pre-production unit without the final firmware to find out, exactly how this camera is going to perform. The only other thing that is kind of a bump for me with this camera is the 1/25th sync speed. Now, shooting portrait work and stuff like that, when people aren't moving, that kind of thing, it's not a big deal, especially when you're in studio. When you're outside, it typically just means that you're gonna have to use more ND filters, that kind of thing, to bring that, shallow depth of field back. But, if you're shooting anything, especially, even from a portrait or a fashion perspective, where you've got a dress, say, that's, blowing in the wind, and you want everything to freeze, sharp, and you're using your strobes out on location, it's not going to do that. It's going to, that slower sync speed is going to start causing issues with motion blur. And so I know that they have the Hasselblad adapter to allow you to use the leaf shutters on some of the Hasselblad glass. The downside to that obviously being that you can only use manual focus. But again, if your subject wasn't moving, or you just happen to be super good at manual focusing, maybe that's not an issue. I don't know. It didn't interfere with any of the work that I was shooting for this, so maybe it's not that big a deal, but so let's talk about some things that I really did like about this camera. Surprisingly, form factor. For those of you who have seen my vlogs before, I'm not an XT2 fan. And when this came out and people were talking about it at Photokina, they were saying, it's got this kind of really cool XT2 form factor. Totally not the case. It might have a little bit of an XT2 body style resemblance, but outside of that, it feels nothing like the XT2 at all. It actually feels really, really nice. It's light, surprisingly light for how big this camera is and how big the lenses are. From a build quality perspective, it's essentially exactly like the X series, the X Pro 2 or the XT2. The lenses, the materials feel the exact same, just bigger, so imagine picking up like a 56mm 1.2 and just make it bigger, and then you have this. So the grip is also one of those things that I really, really like on this. They did this kind of half grip piece onto it. So the grip, as you can see here, it's not up here, it's down on here. And the buttons on the back all lay out pretty much exactly like all of the other X series cameras, which is awesome. If you own an X series camera, this body just kind of falls right into that, layout and menu category. So it feels really familiar to me right out of the box, which is super nice. But this grip, with being a half grip, it's still, I don't know, again, I thought it was something I wasn't going to like, and it turned out to be something that was super comfortable. I can hold this all day and it feels great, which is super surprising. The other thing, and you might notice it when you get a chance to see this camera, is a lot of the buttons have no labeling on them whatsoever. And I actually asked them about that, and I said, why didn't you guys label anything? And they basically said it was just so that you could fully customize this camera to have the button layout however you want it, without having any other indicators of what that button might be. So essentially, you can just you can program this camera from a button layout to make sense however it makes sense in your head, which again, super customizable, smart. I don't have access to the RAW files yet. As the time of making this video, Lightroom is still not supporting it, neither is Capture One. Now I know Lightroom is going to support it. I'm not sure about Capture One yet. As far as I know, that's still a discussion ongoing. But the JPEGs out of this thing are incredible. The amount of detail that it's retaining is crazy, and the RAWs are only going to be that much better. From what I understand, the sensor's supposed to have a 14 stops of dynamic range on it. So again, I'm anxious to get into the files in a RAW format and see what they're capable of. But the JPEGs, having edited some of those already, I mean, they look amazing. Another thing that's kind of a cool perk is this, if that focuses. This is a cable management piece, and it actually comes in the box with the camera itself. And what you do is it screws in screws in right here. And what it does is it connects to the USB 3 port and it wraps your cable in through here, making it so that nothing can pull out. You don't lose any connection. For anybody who tethers, you know how much of a pain in the ass it is when you keep losing connection to your camera. I've done everything from gaff tape the shit out of it to my body, everything like that. I also got like a Tether Tools makes this piece that attaches to your eyelet, I guess, and then to the cord, which is supposed to hold it in place. It does a not bad job. This is super secure. Like, once you get the cord in there, it's not going anywhere. And it comes in the box, which is awesome. Good on Fuji for, you know, seeing a problem and solving it. So, well done. And I guess the last thing to kind of touch on is the Fuji glass. But at this point, I don't even feel like I need to say anything about the Fuji glass. Ever since I started using the X system, every piece of glass that I've owned from them has been amazing. And it's the exact same with the 3 lenses in this lineup. Wide open, they're incredibly sharp, the detail is staggering. And you know, it's just continuing on that, you know, trajectory that Fuji's on with making glass that's just, you know, mind-boggling. So with that, that's pretty much, you know, all I've got for a first look at this camera. When I eventually get a full production model, I'll be able to come back and kind of reiterate and talk about, you know, what the focusing is actually like, when I can get into the raw files and, you know, test the dynamic range and kind of push these files and see what they're capable of. I will come back and let you guys know what I find on that. I'm expecting, you know, the files to be amazing, but until I actually see them, I'm just not really going to say much about them. On that note, every image that you've seen in this video has been edited using my custom Lightroom presets. There will be a link to those in the description below. And these vlogs, I mean, they just come from, you know, you guys asking questions. So whether it's email or on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, whatever, whenever I start getting enough questions about one particular subject, that is when I decide to create a vlog. So as long as you guys keep asking questions, I'll keep creating these. If you've got them, use whatever social media platform you have, get a hold of me, and you know, we'll just keep making this happen. So on that note, I'm gonna head out, enjoy the video. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. All right, cheers. Because I know someone will inevitably wonder why I dropped a GFX, but I mean, you could drop a baby in there.